The first thing Brenda Whitmore ever said to me was, "Open that gate, or this neighborhood is going to have a problem." And the crazy part is she said it before I had even finished my first cup of coffee in the house. It was 6:12 on a cool Friday morning. The kind of lake morning where the mist hangs low over the water and every sound carries farther than it should, and I was standing barefoot on old pine floors with closing papers spread across the kitchen island, breathing in fresh paint, damp wood, and that sharp metallic smell rolling off the boat lift below the hill. I had owned the lake house for less than 12 hours. My name is Ethan Walker, and I bought that place because I wanted quiet so deep I could hear a trolling motor half a mile away and know it wasn't mine. I wanted mornings with black coffee, a tackle box on the counter, and nobody telling me what to do on land I had paid for fair and square. Then I heard tires crush gravel outside, hard and fast, like whoever was coming up my drive thought urgency could become authority if it arrived loud enough. I looked out through the front window and saw 3 SUVs lined up crooked across my driveway, pearl white, silver, black, all of them still idling, exhaust drifting through the cold. The driver's doors opened almost in sync. 2 men stepped out first with clipboards and that eager, official posture people wear when they want to be mistaken for power. Then Brenda got out of the center SUV in a cream windbreaker and oversized sunglasses, even though the sun had barely cleared the trees. She moved like she had been practicing that walk for years, chin up, shoulders squared, one manicured hand already pointing downhill toward my boat ramp before she even reached the porch. "There he is," she called, not to me, but to the men behind her, like I was a maintenance issue she had come to inspect. By the time I opened the front door, I could smell their perfume mixing with gasoline and wet leaves. Brenda smiled the way people do when they've decided smiling counts as manners. "I'm Brenda Whitmore, HOA president," she said. "We need access restored immediately. Not hello, not welcome to the neighborhood, not congratulations on the purchase, just need restored immediately." I glanced past her shoulder toward the water, where my private concrete ramp cut through the shoreline like a clean gray blade, still dark with morning dew. A chain-link gate stood halfway down the slope where the gravel narrowed between 2 stone retaining walls, the only way to get a trailer to the ramp without tearing through the woods. The seller had handed me that gate key the night before it closing, sliding it across the table with the smallest smile I'd seen all week. "Keep this safe," he had said. "It matters more than they think." At the time, I figured he was talking about break-ins or bored teenagers. Standing there with Brenda on my porch and her board members already filming my property on their phones, I realized he had meant something else entirely. Brenda took one step closer and lowered her voice like she was being generous. "The community has launched boats from that ramp for years," she said. "So let's not make your first day here difficult." I looked at her, then at the men, then at the gate down the hill with the chain still locked exactly where I had left it. And right there, before the coffee even cooled in my hand, I understood what kind of neighborhood I had just moved into, and how badly these people had misjudged the man holding the only key. I did not answer Brenda right away, and that seemed to bother her more than if I had argued. I just set my coffee mug down on the porch rail and looked past her toward the water, because that lake was the whole reason I was standing there in the first place. 2 months earlier, I had been living in a subdivision outside Nashville where every backyard looked borrowed, and every morning sounded like leaf blowers and garage doors. I had spent 23 years working in commercial site logistics, solving other people's property headaches, fixing access problems, reading surveys, permits, and county maps until legal boundaries felt more familiar to me than most conversations. When my father passed, he left me enough to stop renting pieces of my life from other people and finally buy one place that felt quiet, solid, and mine. This house was that place. It sat on just under 2 acres of sloped ground, with a cedar exterior, faded silver by weather, a screened porch facing east, and a narrow strip of shoreline that opened to one of the calmest coves on the lake. The ramp was old but well poured, wide enough for a baseboat trailer, maybe 11 feet across, and angled just right so the water took a launch clean even in late summer. It was not flashy. It was useful. That is what I loved about it. Every board in that house creaked like it had earned the right. Every metal latch, every dock cleat, every stone step down to the water felt like something built by a person who believed land should work for the one paying for it. The seller, a retired contractor named Mike Garrison, had walked me through the place the evening before with a ring of labeled keys in one hand and a folder thick with surveys, tax records, and closing documents in the other. He was the kind of man who paused before speaking, like he measured words the same way he measured lumber. When we reached the gate halfway down the slope, he tugged the chain once, listened to the lock click, and handed me a brass key with a faded blue cap on it. "Do yourself a favor," he said. "Read every page in that folder before anybody around here tells you what you own." I thought he was being careful. Standing on the porch with Brenda staring at me like I was a gatekeeper in the way of her weekend plans, I realized he had been giving me a warning. "Mr. Walker," she said, drawing out my name like she had already decided she did not like it. "The previous owner understood how things worked here." I looked at her and said, "Funny, because the previous owner told me to read the paperwork before listening to the neighborhood." One of the clipboard men shifted his weight. The other stopped pretending not to record. Brenda smiled again, thinner this time. "This is shared lake access," she said. "It has always been shared lake access." The way she said always made it sound less like history and more like a threat dressed up as tradition. I could hear a fish break the surface somewhere in the cove. I could hear a wind chime from a neighboring dock. I could hear my own pulse settling into that calm, steady rhythm I get when I know somebody is trying to bluff on ground they have not surveyed. I had not bought this house for a fight. I bought it because I was tired of being told where my edges were by people who had never earned the right to draw them. And in that moment, with the lake behind me and Brenda Whitmore on my porch acting like she had arrived to collect a debt, I knew exactly what kind of test this was. Brenda had the kind of confidence that does not come from being right. It comes from winning the same argument so many times that nobody around you remembers to ask for proof. She stepped past the first porch post like she was already measuring where she wanted her people to stand on my property, then lifted a folder from one of the men behind her and tapped it against her palm. "We have community records," she said. "We have board approval. We have years of established use." The man on her left, tall, sunburned, maybe early 60s, gave me a nod that was supposed to look reasonable. "I am Gary Lohman, Architectural Committee," he said, like that title should matter to a man standing on his own front porch. The other one introduced himself as Ted Hensley from Compliance, which sounded less like a job and more like a warning label. I noticed both of them kept glancing downhill toward the ramp, not at the lake, not at the shoreline, just at that strip of poured concrete and the locked gate above it, the way hungry people look at a pantry door. Brenda opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet in a plastic sleeve. She held it up where I could see a neighborhood logo at the top and a paragraph in legal-sounding language underneath, but she did not hand it to me. That told me more than the paper itself ever could. People with real authority let you read. People bluffing prefer distance. "This access point has served the residents of Whitmore Cove for more than a decade," she said. The former owner cooperated. "We expect the same from you." I leaned one shoulder against the porch frame and asked, "Do you expect me to cooperate before or after I read what you are waving around?" Ted shifted his clipboard under one arm. Gary looked down. Brenda did not. "You are not the first new owner to misunderstand how this neighborhood works," she said. "Everyone here contributes to the quality of life." It was the kind of sentence that sounds harmless until you hear the engine underneath it. What she meant was control. What she meant was that people like her had been walking onto other people's land for so long, they had started calling it tradition. I looked past them and saw a pontoon boat on a distant dock, still covered, silver rails catching the new light. Somewhere across the cove, a dog barked twice and went quiet. The whole lake felt like it was listening. "Let me guess," I said. "You have a community picnic down here. Maybe fireworks. Maybe a holiday launch." Gary cleared his throat. Ted looked uncomfortable. Brenda smiled like she thought I was finally getting practical. "Fishing weekends. Family events. Seasonal access. It is part of what people pay dues for." There it was. Not safety. Not emergency use. Convenience. They had built part of their neighborhood routine around a ramp they did not own and a gate they could not open without permission. "And you told all those people they could keep using it before I even unloaded my truck," I said. Brenda tilted her head. "I told them there would not be a problem." I laughed once, quiet enough to keep it polite. That is when her expression changed. Just a little. Enough to show me she was not used to hearing a calm man sound amused. She had expected pushback, maybe panic, maybe the nervous energy of somebody new to the county. What she did not expect was recognition. I knew her type the second she stepped out of that sport utility vehicle. Every county has one. Every lakeside development grows one eventually. The self-appointed gatekeeper who talks in plural, borrows authority from committees, wraps demand in etiquette, and acts offended the moment somebody asks where the line actually is. Brenda Whitmore was not there to introduce herself. She was there to set the tone, to make sure the new owner learned on day one that the real deed, in her mind, belonged to the association. She was just unfortunate enough to pick a man who had spent most of his working life solving property disputes for people richer and louder than she was, and I could already feel the shape of this fight settling into place like a survey stake driven straight into red clay. Brenda did not stay long after that, which told me she had not come for a discussion. She had come for surrender, and when she did not get it, she switched to the next move people like her always make. Paper. By 8:30 that morning, before I had finished carrying in the second load of boxes from my truck, my phone lit up with an email from an address called Whitmore Cove Homeowners Association Compliance Office. The subject line read Immediate Access Correction Notice. I stood in the half-empty living room with dust in the air, a rolled rug under one arm, and opened it. They had attached 3 photographs of my lower drive and one grainy overhead shot that looked like it had been taken from a drone. Under the pictures was a paragraph claiming I had obstructed a long-standing community launch area, interfered with resident lake access, and created a safety concern by keeping the gate secured. There it was again, that word secured, twisted into something suspicious, as if locking your own property was the act of a man with something to hide. The notice gave me until noon on Saturday to provide unrestricted entry for residents and their boat trailers. If I failed to comply, they said, the board reserved the right to impose daily fines, pursue corrective action, and recover costs associated with restoring community use. Restore. Recover. Corrective action. Every sentence was built like a cheap fence, meant to look sturdy from a distance. I set the rug down, walked to the kitchen island, and spread out my closing folder under the light. The house was still quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint slap of water against the dock below the hill. I could smell cardboard, coffee gone cold, and the sharp, clean scent of lake air drifting through the screen door. Then another email came in, this one from a neighborhood mailing list I had not subscribed to but apparently had already been added to. Somebody had forwarded Brenda's notice with a cheerful little note about looking forward to seeing everyone at the reopening launch on Saturday morning. Reopening. Like my property had been closed for repairs instead of purchased by a new owner less than a day earlier. I kept scrolling. A few replies came in within minutes. One woman wrote that her grandchildren loved using that ramp. Another man said his pontoon would not clear the rocks near the public marina and that this was the only practical access on their side of the cove. A third thanked Brenda for handling it quickly before the new guy got difficult. I read that line twice. The new guy? Not Ethan. Not the owner. Just the new guy, as if I were a temporary inconvenience standing between them and a weekend habit. Around 10:15, a white pickup rolled slowly past the front of my lot, paused, then continued on toward the turnaround. 10 minutes later, a locksmith van came up the drive, stopped at the top of the slope, and sat there long enough for the passenger to look hard at my gate before easing back onto the road. At 11, I found a laminated orange notice tucked under a decorative stone by the porch steps, marked courtesy posting, even though no courtesy had been involved in any of this. Brenda was not trying to prove anything to me anymore. She was building momentum around me, telling the neighborhood a story before I had even had time to hang my shirts in the closet. And the story was simple. The board had spoken. Access would be restored. The only thing left to decide was whether I would move aside quietly or make them show the whole lake exactly how far they were willing to go for something they did not own. By Friday afternoon, the house no longer sounded like a fresh start. It sounded like a place under observation. Every few minutes a vehicle rolled past a little slower than necessary, tires crunching over the gravel at the edge of the road, engines idling just long enough to let me know people were looking. I was in the downstairs utility room unboxing tools when my phone rang with an unfamiliar county number, and for half a second I thought maybe this whole thing was about to get simple. It did not. A clerk from the recorder's office told me copies of the older easement records were archived off-site and would not be pulled until Monday. I stood there staring at the concrete floor with a tape measure in one hand and the phone warm against my ear, Listening to her apologize in the flat, practiced tone of someone who had no idea that a whole neighborhood had been promised access to my land by Saturday morning. When I hung up, the room felt smaller. The air smelled like detergent, damp cinder block, and the cardboard dust of unopened boxes. Upstairs, another email had already arrived. Brenda had sent a follow-up notice with the board copied, repeating the deadline and adding that contractors might be present on Saturday to facilitate access restoration. Contractors. She had turned trespass into project management. I went outside and walked the slope down toward the gate, boots sinking slightly into the soft edge of the gravel where the morning dew had not fully burned off. The chain was still wrapped tight through the posts. The brass lock with the faded blue cap sat exactly where Mike had left it. Beyond the gate, the ramp slid into water, so still it looked almost polished, and for a second I could hear the version of this place I thought I was buying. Just wind in the cedar branches and the low creak of the dock lines. Then I heard voices above me. Two men in khaki work shirts were standing near the top of the drive beside a white service van, one of them holding a clipboard, the other squinting down toward the hinge side of my gate. Neither stepped onto the lower slope, but both stood there long enough to make their purpose obvious. Measuring, estimating, planning. I walked back up and asked if I could help them. The older one gave me a tight smile and said they were only checking clearances in case the association needed access improvements. Improvements. Another pretty word for taking something that was not theirs. When they drove off, I sat on the porch steps with my cold coffee from that morning still on the rail, darker now, bitter enough to match the taste in the back of my throat. My phone kept buzzing. A message from a neighbor I had not met suggested I be reasonable. Another said everyone had always used that launch, and I should not start trouble my first week. The best one came from a man named Russell who wrote 3 full paragraphs about community values and ended by asking what kind of person buys on a lake and then locks people out. I read that message twice, not because it mattered, but because it showed me how completely Brenda had framed the story before I had spoken a word. To them, I was not protecting private property. I was withholding a tradition. I was not the owner. I was the obstacle. By sunset, the whole cove seemed to be moving around a version of Saturday that already existed in their minds. Boat trailers would line up. The gate would open. The new guy would fold. And standing there in the gold light with the smell of warm pine and lake water hanging over the yard, I will admit something I did not admit to anybody else. For the first time all day, it looked like Brenda might actually pull this off, not because she was right, but because she was loud, organized, and surrounded by people who had gotten comfortable calling convenience a right. That night, I stopped trying to outpace the noise outside and started listening to the paper instead. The house had gone dark except for the lamp over the kitchen island and the low blue glow from the microwave clock, and I sat there with the closing folder open in front of me, sleeves rolled up, reading line by line while crickets worked the hillside and the lake slapped softly against the dock below. There is a particular sound thick paper makes when you turn it slowly, and after years of permits, plats, site maps, and access agreements, I have learned that sound usually comes right before the truth. Mike Garrison had organized everything better than most attorneys I have met. Survey on top, warranty deed beneath it, tax parcel map, utility easements, prior correspondence, a title commitment with yellow highlights along the margins. The more I read, the less interested I became in Brenda's confidence. Confidence does not survive contact with a legal description. Around 10:40, I found the first crack in her whole performance. It was buried in an older document recorded 3 owners back, a limited permissive access agreement between the association and a previous lakefront owner, not an easement, not a covenant running with the land, just permission, revocable, personal, and tied to that owner's use. 2 pages later came the better part, an attached termination filed years afterward and stamped by the county, ending that arrangement in plain language, so simple even Brenda should have understood it. The association had no permanent launch rights, no transferable shoreline access, no continuing claim, just a dead agreement people had apparently kept pretending was still alive because nobody had forced them to read past the first page. I leaned back in the chair and looked out through the black kitchen window toward the slope, where I could just make out the faint outline of the gate in the moonlight. Then I pulled the survey closer. That was when the whole thing clicked into place, so clean it almost made me laugh. The lower drive did not merely cross my lot. It sat entirely within it, from the bend near the retaining wall all the way down to the concrete launch. The gate was not near my boundary. It was the boundary in motion, the control point, the choke point, the only practical access for any trailer wider than a garden cart. The retaining walls on either side narrowed the approach to a single lane, and the wooded drop beyond them made any alternate route impossible. Without major excavation and permits, nobody in that neighborhood was getting by Saturday. I laid the parcel map beside the survey and traced the lines twice with my finger just to feel the geometry of it. Brenda had built her entire plan around the assumption that I would react emotionally before I reacted professionally. She thought I would argue on the porch, trade angry emails, maybe call the sheriff too early and look unstable while she played community victim in front of the board. Instead, I was sitting in my own kitchen with a brass key beside my coffee mug and county-stamped proof that the story she had sold the neighborhood was built on expired permission and wishful thinking. I remember the exact feeling that settled over me in that moment. Not relief. Relief is soft. This was sharper than that. It was the calm you get when a bluff finally shows its cards and the table turns quiet. I pulled out my phone, took clear photos of the termination page, the survey, the legal description, and the gate alignment. Then I opened the window over the sink and listened to the night air moving over the water. Brenda had spent all day trying to make me feel cornered. What she did not understand was that she had never cornered me at all. She had cornered herself at the one place on that entire shoreline where every boat trailer, every board member, every fake notice, and every bit of neighborhood pressure had to stop and wait for permission from the man holding the key. By sunrise on Saturday, I had already decided I was not going to win this by being louder than Brenda. I was going to win it by being earlier, quieter, and better prepared. The first thing I did was drive into town just after 7, while fog still sat low over the water and the gas station coffee still tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since midnight. I met a surveyor named Nora Ellis in the parking lot outside the county records annex, a woman in work boots and a canvas jacket who looked at the documents I brought, flipped through the stamped termination, studied the legal description, and gave me the kind of nod professionals save for moments when the map and the facts finally agree. By 8:30 she was on my property with a tripod, orange flags, and a steel tape, walking the slope with calm precision while I followed behind carrying copies of the survey and deed in a weatherproof folder. She did not waste words. She set corner references, checked bearings, and confirmed exactly what I had already seen in the paperwork. The lower drive, the narrowed lane between the retaining walls, the gate posts, the approach to the ramp. Every inch that mattered sat inside my lot. There was no shared corridor, no community right-of-way, no hidden clause that turned my shoreline into a neighborhood boat launch because somebody had gotten used to using it. After she finished, I made 3 more moves before noon. I replaced the old brass lock with a heavier weather-sealed one, not because the first had failed me, but because I wanted there to be no confusion about whether that gate was active control or decorative habit. Then I mounted 2 small cameras under the eave of the boathouse and one above the porch facing the drive, each angled to catch the road, the slope, and anyone approaching the chain. After that I called an attorney in the next county over, a real estate man named Daniel Price, whose voice sounded like sandpaper over hardwood. I emailed him the deed, the survey, the terminated access agreement, and every notice Brenda had sent. 20 minutes later he called back and said exactly what I had hoped to hear. Do not argue with them. Do not touch anybody. Do not let anybody through. I will send a demand letter within the hour. By 1:15 it was done. Certified email to the board. Formal notice that the association had no legal access rights, that any attempt to enter would constitute trespass, and that any contractor sent onto my land without written permission would expose the association to liability. I printed a copy and slid it into a clear plastic sleeve on the inside of the gate where it could be read from the road. Then I did one last thing that made the whole plan feel complete. I left Brenda's orange courtesy posting taped to the kitchen cabinet where I could see it every time I walked by, a reminder that arrogance likes paper until paper starts talking back. By late afternoon the cove had gone strangely quiet. No slow drive-bys. No service vans. No more emails. Just the rustle of cedar branches, the smell of warm lake water, and the heavy click of my new locks settling into place. Brenda thought Saturday morning was going to be a reopening. I knew better. It was going to be a demonstration, and every detail she had used to pressure me all day Friday was about to become evidence that she had built her authority on a gate she did not own, a ramp she could not claim, and a bluff that was about to stop cold at my property line. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of cold silver light that makes every sound feel sharper, and by 7:45 I could already hear trailers rattling somewhere up the road before I saw them. I was standing on the porch in a gray work jacket with Daniel Price's letter folded inside the pocket and a fresh thermos of coffee warming my hand when the first truck rounded the bend, a black pickup towing a baseboat with its cover snapped tight and water beads still clinging to the hull. It slowed when the driver saw the chain across the gate, then stopped completely when he noticed the posted notice in the clear sleeve and the orange survey flags running down both sides of the lower drive like a line of warning lights. Within 10 minutes there were 6 trucks stacked along the shoulder, trailers angled, engines idling, people stepping out squinting toward the slope as if confusion alone might move steel. Then Brenda arrived. Same cream windbreaker, same sunglasses, same lifted chin, except this time she was moving faster, heels biting into gravel, phone already in her hand. "What is this?" she snapped, waving toward the flags, the notice, the new lock, all of it. I did not answer right away. I let her take in the whole picture first. Nora Ellis was already halfway down the slope beside her tripod, calm as a fence post, checking one of the markers she had set the day before. Parked near the road was a county SUV with Deputy Cole Mercer leaning against the front fender, arms folded, hat low, saying nothing because he did not need to. The law does not get louder just because somebody in an association jacket is upset. Brenda marched right up to the gate and grabbed the plastic sleeve, scanning the letter once before looking at me like paper itself had become a personal insult. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You cannot shut out an entire community over one misunderstanding." "It is not a misunderstanding," I said. "It is a property line." That was the moment the whole performance started to crack. One of the men behind her, somebody I had seen in the email chain, asked Nora if the flags marked association access. Without even looking up, she said, "No, sir. They mark Mr. Walker's lot. The drive, the gate, and the ramp are all inside his parcel." Quiet spread through that group in a way I will never forget. Not dramatic, not loud, just the sudden drop in human noise when a room realizes the confident person at the front has been speaking from memory instead of fact. Brenda turned toward Deputy Mercer and tried one last angle, saying the residents had always used the launch and that I was escalating a neighborhood issue. Mercer pushed off the fender, walked to the gate, read the notice himself, then said in a voice flat enough to stop an engine, "Ma'am, established habit is not ownership. This access is private. Nobody is crossing this chain today." Behind her, engines began shutting off one by one. A man near the back climbed into his truck without a word. Another started backing his trailer out with that slow, awkward turn people make when they know the morning is over and they do not want to be the first one seen leaving. Brenda stood there with the lake at her back. The whole bluff collapsed around her, and for the first time since she stepped onto my porch the day before, she had nothing to point at except a gate she did not control. I took the brass key from my pocket, held it up just once so she could see it catch the morning light, then slid it back where it belonged. By 9:30, the road had cleared enough that I could finally hear the lake again. The last trailer rolled out slow, tires dipping off the shoulder and back onto the pavement, and the sound of idling engines faded into the trees until all that remained was wind moving through cedar branches and the faint metal knock of a dock cleat below the hill. Brenda did not leave first. That seemed important to her. She stood near the shoulder with her sunglasses pushed up on her head, phone pressed flat against her palm, watching Nora pack her tripod and Deputy Cole Mercer finish his notes like she was still waiting for the morning to bend back in her favor. It never did. By noon, Daniel Price had sent a second letter, this one sharper than the first, demanding that the association withdraw every notice, every claimed fine, every statement implying community rights to my ramp, and preserve all communication related to their planned entry onto my land. He copied Brenda, the full board, and the management company. At 2:14 that afternoon, while I was tightening a loose hinge on the screen porch door, my phone buzzed with the reply. The subject line had changed. No more correction notice. No more access restoration. Just board update. Inside was 3 paragraphs of careful language that tasted like defeat even through a screen. The association was suspending all enforcement actions related to the lower drive and launch area, pending further legal review. Residents were instructed not to enter the property. Future lake access would be directed elsewhere. They did not apologize, not directly, but people like Brenda almost never do. They revise, suspend, clarify, and quietly step backward when the paperwork gets too bright. Monday morning, the recorder's office sent over the archived copies I had requested, and they matched everything Mike's folder had already told me. The old permissive use agreement was dead. The termination was clean. The lines were clean. By Wednesday, the management company had agreed in writing to reimburse my survey cost and attorney fees to avoid further action. That was the part one enjoyed most, not because of the money, but because numbers on paper forced pride to sit down and become practical. Late that afternoon, I walked the slope alone with a cordless drill, a level, and a small aluminum sign I had picked up from a marine supply store in town. The air smelled like sun-warmed pine needles and fresh-cut grass from somewhere across the cove. The water was calm, soft ripples folding into the concrete edge of the launch like the whole lake had gone back to minding its own business. I mounted the sign on the gatepost at eye level, straight and clean where nobody could pretend not to see it. Private ramp. Private gate. Then I stepped back and looked at the chain, the retaining walls, the narrow lane, the exact little choke point Brenda had mistaken for a neighborhood tradition. She thought power was an email list, a board vote, and a loud voice on somebody else's porch. She thought a new owner would panic before he read the file. But land does not care about tone, and gates do not open for confidence. They open for the person with the legal right and the key. That evening I took my coffee down to the dock for the first time since moving in and watched the sun drop copper across the cove while the sign cooled in the shade above me. The ramp was still there. The gate was still locked. The neighborhood was still quiet. And for the first time since Brenda rolled up my drive, the place felt exactly like what I had bought. Not a battleground, not a shared convenience, but a piece of shoreline where the truth had finally settled into place and stayed there.